Introducing Rabotat Radio, an open forum bringing together artists from our community to yours to discuss music, food, film, and everything in between. My name is Ironfist, and I'm the co-founder of Rabotat. Our first episode features our very own Jay Chavez, who sat down with myself and Jake Kassman of the band Drunken Logic to discuss his upcoming EP, It's Only Temporary, out on March 12th on Rabotat. In this episode, we discuss the role of using your voice for progress and how inspiration from Christopher Nolan and Phil Collins shaped this collaborative production effort. Let's dive in.
You've lived in Boston and you lived in Cali. I mean, what is it? East Coast or West Coast kind of feel? You know what I mean?
West Coast is best coast.
Hey, okay.
I think when you grow up in California, there's something novel about the idea of seasons because you don't really have them.
Okay, yeah, so for sure.
There's basically like summer and then there's kind of a fall, but fall doesn't really get below 40 degrees, and then you kind of So I always liked the ideas of four seasons, and then I spent 9 years on the East Coast and decided that winter is highly overrated, and I don't care for it. So I would say kind of I feel equally at home in SoCal and NorCal. So okay. I'd say that the whole state feels like home.
So you would say those are definitely like places that you could see yourself just sticking to.
For sure. Well, and I am currently writing and kind of demoing the next Drunken Logic full length, and the sound I want to make an LA rock record is kind of the idea. I want to do something in the Tom Petty, Warren Zevon vein.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of a little, that has that sound and that feeling of Southern California to it. So
for sure. Do you think
next.
those like you mean do you think you pull certain inspiration from each place you were at, or do you kind of just, do you sit still on most, like you have like a set kind of thing that you do? So
the first track on the record is A Good Soul Is Hard to Find, and that's just about like feeling like you're trapped in like a lab rat in a cage in a crappy Boston apartment.
That's exactly how I felt living in Boston.
Oh, for sure.
That's
for sure. Like it's funny, when I first moved out here, people would always say, like, they would say, like, the housing's, the rent's about the same. Is the housing better in Boston or in LA? And I say, no, it's better in LA because the price might be the same, but the floors are level. There's no one living in your living room.
That's hilarious.
Like there's, it's much better.
I don't have to fight my way through some snow. Yeah, I get it. Oh wow, that's funny. That's crazy. So you brought up Good Soul. And your lyrics. That's one thing I definitely wanted to talk about. Your lyrics definitely, they paint this picture in your mind canvas. You know what I mean? And is that like something that you picked up and you're like, oh man, I'm gonna work on this so people can just get that in their mind?
Yeah, I think yes. I always listen to bands that like to tell stories, even if they're not folk per se. I think there are bands or artists that really have a point to what they're trying to say, and the story or a theme or an image they're trying to depict. I'd also say that I come from a long line of writers, but that all of the other writers in my family became lawyers. Is the real difference?
Became what?
Lawyers.
Yeah. I've heard some crazy things. You know what I mean? People, that's you breaking up. That's the black sheep. You know what I mean? Kind of thing.
Definitely. But like my brother works for the Department of Justice.
Oh, wow.
But he wrote a novel in his spare time.
Oh wow!
Hey, just real quick.
So like there's people I have a lot of very kind of successful professional people in my family, but they all kind of have that other side to them too.
Yeah. Oh wow, and that's really
so.
Cool.
There's very highly literate family too. Yeah. So I think that contributed a lot to it.
That's awesome. And so Dick, where does same kind of question? Inspiration. You've moved and you've lived in all these places. You lived in Europe. You lived in Germany. You lived in Spain and things like that. So it's like, how does that make your how does that make you more developed as a musician and how you create? And get inspiration,
It's a really good question. Well, when I met Jake originally, I was doing rap mainly. I was a hip hop like turntablist. And so in the time frame from when I met him to when I kind of went off and did all this stuff, I kind of discovered like electronic production and sound design, house and techno. I mean, Berlin will definitely give you an entire education and experience on like the world of the underground electronic scene. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. it definitely had a huge inspiration like to me and it just had a huge inspiration to my sounds. But when Jake wrote me about trying to do this project, I was really happy to try to do something different. I love making music for the dance floor, and I love making, dark techno and electronic, techno music. I love that stuff. But I'm a rock musician. I grew up listening to Black Sabbath. Jaime gave me my very first rock CD when we were kids.
What was that CD?
Ozzy, Diary of a Madman.
I don't know that.
It's his second album, and it was the album that I had all my CDs stolen when I was a kid, and when I started playing bass, I also play bass on this record, and so I'm playing bass on the record.
There you go.
And I wanted to have, a bit of the stuff I was influenced by. So a lot of the stuff is where I've been with all the electronic music, but a lot of the stuff that I've, contributed to is my own experience as a wannabe rock musician. So
yeah. No, man, that's awesome. So it's great when you have, you guys have done so much, and when you come together, that creates such a I've heard it, some magic. It's great, But so I have to ask, and it's really funny because sometimes I mostly research, and it's because I don't know, maybe sometimes it goes over my head, but I guess I don't read it enough. But Drunken Logic, what's the name? Tell me. It's a fucking great name, man. Honestly, I love it. I love the idea. But does it have a specific feeling, or is it related to something that you saw in music, or what is it?
When I chose the name, it had no meaning whatsoever. I was sitting.
You were drunk.
I was sitting in a pub near Mission Hill with Pig in the name. I forget what it was called.
Okay.
And somebody said the phrase "drunk man's logic," and this was probably February or March of 2012. I was about to do the first ever show of my own material at a venue on Berkeley's campus called the Red Room at Cafe 939.
Oh, classic.
And I'd been searching. I had this running list in my phone of band names that I thought were cool, and then every time I Googled them, they were taken already. And so,
yeah,
Drunk Man's Logic, I kind of just toyed with that. That got shortened to Drunken Logic. I Googled it. It wasn't taken, and I didn't want to think about it anymore. That's the short answer of why that name came to be. Very quickly, though, I kind of realized that a lot of my songs at first, and even now too, are are self-reflective and are about looking back at something you did 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago, maybe 6 days ago, and thinking, was I high when I did that? Why did I think that? What was my thought process?
Right? It makes so much sense at the time. You're like,
yeah. No, the tagline for the band is "Songs that made sense at the time."
Perfect. Yeah,
So I like to say now I think the name is redundant. I think that all logic seems drunken with hindsight if you give it enough time.
That is great. I like that is a quote.
Yeah.
somebody mark that.
I got to trademark that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. I really like that one for sure. But Drunken Logic, that's such a great name.
You know the story behind Green Day's name?
No,
I do not. No.
So they're on their first album. There is a song called Green Day. They were called something else at the time. I forget what. But it's a song about being high for 24 hours.
It's a Green Day.
It's a Green Day.
What made this project different from all your other ones, man? Like what's the what makes this one tick?
It's so we've covered a lot of how it sounds completely different than any other Drunken Logic record. I'd still say it sounds like a Drunken Logic record. It just definitely, at least at first listen, it's kind of shocking to hear where we end up going, especially if you've heard the rest of our stuff. You'd be very surprised that this is the direction this record ends up going. I think the other thing is that it's the least conceptual thing I've ever put out, in that the first two Drunken Logic records are largely biographical and chronological.
Okay.
And then the third album, The Loudness Wars, is in a lot of ways my version of American Idiot. It's a rock opera about two characters in a very politically fraught situation in our country and trying to make sense of it all, and also trying to find empathy for people who disagree with you on a pretty profound level.
It's hard sometimes. I get it.
Do not get me started, man. You don't want to check my Facebook activity log these last week and a half. It's been bad.
That's really funny. That's funny that you say that, because I honestly think it's very important to mention what you've done, your activism, your educational causes, what you've supported. Everything. It's a conversation that I feel needs to be had, but besides all that, it's really important to talk what you do to make your voice heard. You've done great things. 30 days, 30 songs. What is it? You created workshops for Second City, and I feel that's very important. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So the last record we put out was called The Loudness Wars, and the gist of it is that it's basically a character who's perhaps more of our generation and our political leanings, switching off songs with somebody of perhaps our parents' generation and the opposite political leanings.
For sure.
And the way that record came into being was that I wrote a song called What a Beautiful Morning that was supposed to kind of satirize and lampoon conservative nostalgia for 1950s America.
For sure.
And we ended up making this really cool music video for it that uses entirely found footage. It's all public domain, 1950s PSAs, newsreels, and cartoons, basically. And we just use that to paint this visual picture of what the 1950s, what conservatives think the 1950s were like versus what the 1950s was actually like.
For sure.
And showing that contrast. And so we ended up getting to donate that song and that video to a project that was started by the author Dave Eggers called 30 Days, 30 Songs. And it was, artists like Jimmy Eat World and Death Cab for Cutie and REM all donated songs. And all of the proceeds went to the Center for Popular Democracy, which was really cool.
Yeah, that's great.
And then outside of that, I'm doing a lot of education here in Los Angeles. I'm a music director at the Second City Hollywood, which is an improv theater, comedy theater. And so we do some comedy workshops for kids and adults online, even in the middle of the pandemic.
Great.
I created a songwriting course for middle school kids in public schools here through the Loud program, which is a nonprofit that I've worked with.
Oh, great.
So I was doing that for the last year. And then on top of all that, the project I was working on before the pandemic hit was turning The Loudness Wars into a stage musical.
Okay.
And we'd raised $1,600 in less than a week to do that. But then the minute the pandemic hit, it became very clear that ain't gonna happen.
That's for sure.
We ended up donating all of that money to Black Voters Matter ahead of the Georgia runoffs 2 weeks ago.
Oh, great.
So we've been doing a lot of work, and I should also mention that Rabotat did fundraiser for BLM this summer, and they've definitely have their done their work too.
For sure, they for sure have. Yeah, that's great. You mean that's always something positive when you have. I mean, when you have a voice, any voice. You mean it's always good to use it. That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, I'll to answer your previous question. This is definitely the least political record that Drunken Logic's ever put out. At least certainly in terms of content. And I mean, I did not think of these 4 songs as being connected in any way, except for the fact that there is, and Nick and I talked a lot about this, but there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of loneliness wrapped up in these songs. And that, I think, thematically connected the songs on the EP. But also, I was very, and we talked a lot about this too. I wanted to make an EP. I'm not a fan of making something that's about something until you've had a little bit of distance to reflect on it.
Okay.
So I very much did not want to write songs about my experience in quarantine when we'd been in quarantine for only like a month and a half when we got started.
For sure.
You know?
Yeah.
So like
the
songs about quarantine are going to come out in like 2 years. Those are when the best songs are going to come out about this experience. And so I wanted to make a record that reflected what we might be feeling right now, but wasn't explicitly about what we're going through.
I think you're doing a great job about it. I mean,
oh, thank you.
What is your recipe for a great song? I mean, do you have a certain thing that you do every time? I mean, is there something you do before? Is it like you get started? Is there, I mean, what would you say in your mind is like, these are the things that I need either to be, you mean, in a good mood or to just come out with this great song?
It's got to have a hook, and I define hook pretty broadly. That can be a lot of different things. Okay. Like, I think the last song on this EP, Nick, I'll Follow My Shadow on the Wall, I think that song is really just a series of hooks just interwoven with each other, and they just kind of, one fades away and another comes in, and it's like, whether it's that synth line that we worked on or the drum part that Mike plays.
And that's how I approached that song, just on a little side note, is because that was the first song I heard for this project when you sent me all these demos. And I'm listening to the song, and it's like every single word, it's like so visceral. So I was like, when I wanted to work on this one, it's like you have every single thing just like hooking you. And so a lot, I mean, it goes back into the word painting, the word imagery of the lyrics.
For sure. So yes, I think it's got to have a hook. I think it's got to be honest. It's got to tell a truth in some way. It doesn't have to be the truth. It doesn't have to be the only truth, but it has to explain a truth.
I like that.
And for it to be a Drunken Logic song, it's got to subvert your expectations.
Okay, great.
That's a
great answer. Yeah.
It's got to throw you a curveball at some point for sure.
That's great. Wow. And Nick, what do you think? What would you say is a recipe for a great song?
Well, as a producer, like as an artist, it's maybe a little bit different. I mean, I am an artist as well, but I look at it like as producing this record, I wanted to make the best Drunken Logic record that I could make. Like when I approached it, I wanted to make something that I would want to listen to as a fan of Drunken Logic. Like the stuff that I've heard, I think it's just natural that like producers want to do that. So when I looked at it like that, I'm like, okay, what flavors do we want? A lot of it goes back to just getting into like the headspace of whatever artist you're working with. Sure. I mean, we put together playlists. I watched movies. Like one of Jake's favorite directors is Christopher Nolan. Shout out for C. Nolan.
Have either of you seen Tenet yet? I'm afraid to rent it because everybody says they don't understand what's happening.
Yeah, me too. That's one of the only ones I haven't seen from the man, and I'm a little nervous because of this controversial thing. So it's like, but he has such a style, with that. So that kind of stuff just helps, and when you're producing another artist, I don't really care what anyone says, but a lot of it is pretend. Like when you're producing the artist, I'm trying to get into that space. Like if I'm trying to be an extension of especially with someone like Jake, who is Drunken Logic, I'm trying to get into the headspace of being, Jake when I'm trying to be an extension of that sound, of those lyrics, because Jake, he wrote those songs, but I personally come from the philosophy that stuff is transmitted through you, So you're like, these ideas and the feelings of the things he wrote, even if they were years ago, they reflect, and I was working on them for the first time while everything was happening last year. So, like that stuff is in the forefront of my mind. So even if we weren't making a record about what was going on last year, we're definitely in the music because I'm writing a lot of these songs in Los Angeles while this stuff is going down.
For sure. Well, and the other, I guess it's not quite the same thing with this, but somebody who I listened to a lot on and really took a lot of inspiration for on this record was Phil Collins in Genesis.
That's actually a really good point to say that, because I listened to a lot of that stuff for this record,
Yeah.
That's like
I straight up told you that I wanted Phil Collins drums on I'll Follow My Shadow. Like that was the sound. But like particularly he is an astonishing vocalist.
Yes.
And does some real, I don't know if you're familiar with the song Mama by Genesis, but like some of the best vocal acting I've ever heard in a song, maybe ever.
It's interesting to juxtapose that, because we're working on that record is made with like a pretty big budget, with time, being able to just like be in a studio together and like experiment, that's like the old school way. And that
the whole idea of getting to write a song in a studio, I don't know if anybody from our generation is ever going to get to do that.
Yeah, so it's like, but we're working with the extreme limitation of being separated, but still trying to find that like way.
Yeah.
And a lot of the synthesizers that I ended up using are those like exact synthesizers that are used on basically all the late 70s, early to mid 80s records. So it all is reflective of that, and
I hear that for sure.
See, that's great. That's what I was talking about before. You have all these elements of different inspirations of backgrounds in this, and then they all come together, and it creates this delicious EP that you're coming out with, man. I can't. That's awesome.
Delicious. I love that.
Delicious
that's
EP.
Good word.
I'm a chef, man. I got to use my words. But honestly, guys, it's been great. If I could just give a little cheers to you guys.
Yeah,
we got
cheers.
we got Nick Ziegler, Ironfist, musician, producer, co-founder of Rabotat Records. We got Jake Cashman, Drunken Logic. His upcoming single again drops February 26th, Lost in February, and his EP hitting digital stores on March 12th. I take that to you, sir. Cheers.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Nick. This was blast.
Yeah, it was fun.